Afghanistan finds itself at a crossroads, grappling with a confluence of internal and external pressures that threaten to engulf the nation and its neighbors in a maelstrom of conflict. The country's strategic location, nestled between Central and South Asia, has historically made it a focal point for empires and modern-day powers alike. This unique positioning has often turned Afghanistan into a battleground for competing interests, both local and international. This is not to suggest that a full-blown multi-front war is inevitable, but the potential for smaller conflicts escalating into wider regional instability is a very real danger. The intricate web of alliances and enmities in the region means that a spark in one area could easily ignite tensions elsewhere. The refugee crisis, for instance, is not just a humanitarian issue, but also a geopolitical one, as neighboring countries grapple with the influx of displaced people. The country's geopolitical landscape is akin to a minefield, littered with historical grievances, ideological clashes, and competing interests. From the ancient Silk Road to the Great Game of the 19th century, Afghanistan has always been a nexus of trade, culture, and conflict. These historical layers add complexity to the modern-day challenges, making it difficult for any single actor to navigate the terrain without stepping on a metaphorical landmine. Navigating this treacherous terrain requires a nuanced understanding of Afghanistan's complex relationship with its neighbors. Pakistan, Iran, China, and the Central Asian republics each have their own stakes in Afghanistan's future. These relationships are influenced by a myriad of factors, including ethnic ties, economic interests, and security concerns. For instance, Pakistan's relationship with Afghanistan is deeply intertwined with its own internal security dynamics and its rivalry with India. Each of these relationships is fraught with its own unique set of challenges, ranging from border disputes and resource competition to the threat of terrorism and the influx of refugees. Water resources, for example, are a critical issue, as rivers that flow through Afghanistan are vital for agriculture and drinking water in neighboring countries. Disputes over these resources can exacerbate tensions and lead to conflict. The specter of the Taliban's return to power in 2021 looms large over these dynamics, injecting a potent dose of uncertainty and apprehension into the region. The Taliban's governance style, which is often at odds with international norms, complicates efforts to stabilize the country. Their control over Afghanistan has also emboldened other extremist groups, creating a more volatile security environment. The international community too is grappling with how to engage with the Taliban, torn between the urgent need to address the humanitarian crisis and the desire to see improvements in human rights and governance. Aid organizations face the dilemma of providing necessary relief without legitimizing the Taliban's rule. Diplomatic efforts are further complicated by the Taliban's inconsistent policies and internal divisions. The situation is further complicated by the presence of the Islamic State of Khorasan province, a rival terrorist group that poses a threat, not just to Afghanistan but also to the broader region. ISIS-K's brutal tactics and ideological extremism make them a formidable adversary, not only for the Taliban, but also for regional and international security forces. Their presence adds another layer of complexity to an already intricate security landscape. In this volatile environment, any misstep, any miscalculation could have far-reaching consequences, potentially igniting a conflagration that engulfs the entire region. The stakes are incredibly high and the margin for error is slim. Diplomatic efforts must be carefully calibrated to avoid unintended escalations, and military actions must be judiciously considered to prevent collateral damage that could fuel further unrest. Understanding the complexities of Afghanistan's geopolitical predicament is not an academic exercise. It is a matter of paramount importance for anyone seeking to prevent further bloodshed and suffering in this war-torn nation. Scholars, policymakers, and humanitarian workers must collaborate to develop strategies that address both immediate needs and long-term stability. Only through a comprehensive and coordinated approach can the cycle of violence and instability be broken, paving the way for a more peaceful and prosperous future for Afghanistan and its neighbors. Behind the geopolitical maneuverings and power plays lies a humanitarian catastrophe of immense proportions. The world often focuses on the political dynamics and military strategies, but the real story is the suffering of millions of innocent people caught in the crossfire. The Afghan people, ravaged by decades of conflict and now grappling with the harsh realities of Taliban rule, are facing an existential crisis. Their daily lives are marked by uncertainty and fear, as they navigate a landscape fraught with danger and deprivation. Millions are trapped in a relentless cycle of poverty, hunger, and displacement, their lives hanging precariously in the balance. The lack of basic resources and opportunities has left them with little hope for a better future. The United Nations estimates that over 28 million Afghans, more than two-thirds of the population, require urgent humanitarian assistance to survive. This staggering number underscores the severity of the crisis and the immense challenges faced by aid organizations. This staggering figure reflects the dire consequences of a collapsed economy, a crippled healthcare system, and a severe drought that has devastated agricultural production. The combination of these factors has created a perfect storm of suffering and need. For many families, putting food on the table is a daily struggle, and malnutrition rates, particularly among children, are alarmingly high. The lack of adequate nutrition has long-term impacts on the health and development of the youngest and most vulnerable. Adding to the misery is a massive internal displacement crisis, with millions uprooted from their homes due to conflict, violence, and natural disasters. These displaced individuals often have nowhere to turn and face an uncertain future. These internally displaced persons often live in squalid conditions, lacking access to basic necessities such as shelter, clean water, and sanitation. The overcrowded camps are breeding grounds for disease and despair. The situation is particularly dire for women and children who are disproportionately affected by the crisis and face heightened risks of abuse, exploitation, and violence. Their plight is a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that come with displacement and instability. The humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan is a stain on the conscience of the world. It is a call to action for governments, organizations, and individuals to come together and provide the necessary support to alleviate the suffering. It is a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and instability, and a call to action for the international community to step up its efforts to alleviate the suffering of the Afghan people. The world must not turn a blind eye to this crisis. Instead, it must respond with compassion and urgency to bring hope and relief to those in desperate need. The humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan is inextricably linked to the country's economic meltdown, a catastrophe that has left millions struggling to make ends meet. The situation is dire, with families facing unprecedented hardships and communities grappling with the fallout of a shattered economy. The sudden withdrawal of foreign aid, which previously propped up the Afghan economy, has had a devastating ripple effect, sending shockwaves through every sector and leaving countless livelihoods in tatters. The cessation of international support has not only halted critical development projects, but also left a void that the local economy is unable to fill. The Afghan currency, the Afghani, has plummeted in value, leading to hyperinflation and skyrocketing prices for basic goods and services. This devaluation has eroded the purchasing power of ordinary citizens, making everyday necessities unaffordable for many. This has made it virtually impossible for ordinary Afghans to afford even the most essential items, pushing them further into poverty and despair. The sight of empty shelves and unaffordable goods has become all too common, a stark reminder of the economic turmoil gripping the nation. Businesses have been forced to shut down, unemployment has soared, and the formal economy has been crippled. The closure of businesses has not only led to job losses but also stifled entrepreneurial spirit, leaving many without a means to support their families. The banking system is on the verge of collapse, with strict withdrawal limits imposed to prevent a run on the banks. These restrictions have created a financial bottleneck, making it difficult for people to access their own money when they need it most. This has made it extremely difficult for businesses to operate and for ordinary citizens to access their savings or receive remittances from abroad. The inability to access funds has paralyzed economic activity, exacerbating the already dire situation. The lack of liquidity in the market has further stifled economic activity, creating a vicious cycle of decline. With cash flow drying up, businesses are unable to pay employees or restock inventory, leading to further closures and job losses. The economic collapse has had a profound impact on the daily lives of Afghans, forcing many to make agonizing choices just to survive. Families are having to decide between buying food or medicine, paying rent, or keeping their children in school. Families are being forced to sell their possessions, pull their children out of school, and resort to desperate measures just to put food on the table. The sight of children leaving school to help support their families is a heartbreaking consequence of the economic crisis. The situation is particularly dire for female-headed households and other vulnerable groups who are disproportionately affected by the economic crisis. Women, children, and the elderly are bearing the brunt of the collapse, with limited resources and support systems to fall back on. Despite the overwhelming challenges, there are glimmers of hope as communities come together to support one another. Local leaders and aid organizations are working tirelessly to provide relief and find sustainable solutions to rebuild the economy and restore hope for the future. As if the man-made disasters of conflict and economic collapse were not enough, Afghanistan is also on the front lines of the climate crisis, facing a relentless onslaught of droughts, floods, and extreme weather events that are exacerbating the humanitarian catastrophe. Years of environmental degradation, coupled with the effects of global warming, have left the country highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. One of the most pressing challenges is the severe drought that has gripped the country for the past 3 years, decimating crops, killing livestock, and pushing millions to the brink of starvation. The drought has dried up rivers and wells, leaving communities without access to clean water and forcing families to flee their homes in search of sustenance. Adding to the woes are the increasingly frequent and intense floods that have ravaged different parts of the country, washing away homes, destroying crops, and displacing thousands. These floods, often triggered by heavy rainfall in the mountains, highlight the country's poor infrastructure and lack of disaster preparedness, leaving communities highly vulnerable to the vagaries of nature. The convergence of conflict, economic collapse, and climate change has created a perfect storm in Afghanistan, pushing the country to the brink of collapse. The situation demands urgent attention from the international community, not just to address the immediate humanitarian needs, but also to help Afghanistan build resilience against future shocks and break free from the cycle of crisis.